They say your life flashes before your eyes before you die. They're wrong. You just see the beginning of the end. For me, it began with a cheap, store-bought cake and a lie wrapped in a blood-red ribbon. My son wanted my house. His wife wanted my life. They got their wish, just not in the way they planned. What they didn't know is that the walls of this house have ears and a memory that goes back 60 years. They thought they were burying a secret, but all they did was plant a seed. And from the darkness, I'm about to watch it grow. If you want to see how a cage becomes a weapon, make sure you follow my story, like and share this video, and hit that notification bell. You won't want to miss how this ends. My name is Mia, and my story, the one that truly matters, began on my 78th birthday. The day started not with a bang, but with the deceptive quiet of a perfect Oregon morning. From the great room I could see Lake Oswego, a sheet of polished silver under a pale, expectant sky. The air in my house, a sprawling craftsman-style giant that my late husband Robert and I had poured our souls into, smelled of lemon oil and old books. It was the scent of my life, of stability, of every joy and every ghost I cherished. It was my sanctuary. I had no idea it was about to become my prison. The chime of the doorbell was too cheerful, an electronic little tune that felt like a lie before the door even opened. It was my son, David, and his wife, Ashley. David stood a step behind her, a habit he'd picked up over the years. He had my husband's height, but none of his presence. He was a man hollowed out by a quiet, persistent erosion I hadn't wanted to see. He held a square box from the grocery store bakery, the kind with a flimsy cellophane window showing a swirl of unnaturally white frosting. Ashley was the one who commanded the space. She swept in, all sharp angles and expensive perfume, her smile a masterpiece of cosmetic dentistry that never once touched the cold calculation in her eyes. Her life was a perfectly curated Instagram feed of brunch spots and boutique fitness classes, and she wore her ambition like a second skin. Today, her talons, as I privately called her long, pointed nails, were painted a slick, arterial red. "Happy birthday, Mia," she cooed, her voice a smooth, practiced melody. She leaned in to kiss the air beside my cheek, a gesture of intimacy that felt more like a territorial marking. 78. You don't look a day over 60. It was the kind of compliment that was also an assessment, a subtle cataloging of my perceived fragility. David gave me a brief, clumsy hug. "Happy birthday, Mom." He wouldn't meet my eyes. He was already looking past me, his gaze sweeping over the hand-carved mantelpiece, the built-in bookshelves heavy with a lifetime of reading, the wide plank floors that Robert had sanded and stained himself. He wasn't seeing a home, he was seeing an asset. We moved into the great room, the heart of the house. I offered them coffee, a reflexive gesture of hospitality that felt absurd under the weight of the unspoken tension. They sat on the custom-made sofa, the one Robert had commissioned for our 25th anniversary. Ashley ran a blood-red nail over the rich leather, a slow, appraising stroke. "We won't stay long," she said, setting a thick, leather-bound folder on the polished oak coffee table between us. The sound it made was dull and final. "We know you like your quiet, but we brought you a little something, more than just cake." David shifted beside her, his discomfort palpable. We've been thinking, Mom, about the future. Your legacy," Ashley added, her voice dropping into a tone of manufactured sincerity. "We want to make sure you're taken care of, that everything is secure." I looked at the folder. It was embossed with the name of a law firm I didn't recognize. A cold knot began to tighten in my stomach. This wasn't a birthday present. It was an agenda. I reached for it, my hand trembling slightly. Ashley slid it across the table with a practiced grace. "It's just some planning documents," she said, her tone breezy, as if discussing the weather. "You know, with the new 2025 tax laws, things can get so complicated with probate. It's a nightmare. We had our guy draw this up. It just simplifies things, protects the estate from the government." The estate. She didn't say, "your home." She said the estate. A clinical, detached term for the vessel of my entire adult life. I opened the folder. The paper inside was thick, expensive. The words swam before my eyes, a dense forest of legalese, but two phrases leaped out at me, stark and brutal. Quick claim deed, durable power of attorney. It wasn't a will. It wasn't a trust. It was a surrender. They wanted me to sign my house, my life, over to them, immediately. They wanted to strip me of my ownership, my autonomy, under the guise of savvy financial planning. The power of attorney was even worse. It was a leash, giving them control over every decision, every dollar, every last shred of my independence. My breath caught in my throat. I looked up from the papers, first at Ashley, whose serene mask was still perfectly in place, and then at David, my son. The boy I had taught to ride a bike on the very lawn that stretched out before the window. His eyes were pleading with me, a silent, desperate message. Just sign it, Mom. Please. Don't make this difficult. The silence in the room grew heavy, thick with the unsaid. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, a sound that had always been a comfort, now felt like a countdown. No, I said. The word was quiet, but it landed in the center of the room like a stone. Ashley's smile didn't falter, but a flicker of something hard and impatient flashed in her eyes. Mia, I don't think you understand. This is for your own good. It's a standard procedure to protect family assets. This house is not a family asset, I replied, my voice gaining strength. I closed the folder and pushed it back across the table. It's my home. It was my husband's home. Every scratch on these floors, every nail in these walls, is a memory. This house is my life. It is not for sale, and it is not a gift to be signed away on a Tuesday. The air in the room didn't just turn cold, it turned to ice. The pretense shattered. Ashley's carefully constructed smile vanished, collapsing into a thin, venomous line. The blood-red nails tapped a staccato rhythm on the leather folder. Selfish, she hissed, the word a spray of venom. You are a selfish old woman. David flinched. Ashley, he began, his voice weak. No, David, she snapped, not even looking at him. Her eyes were locked on me, blazing with a fury that was shocking in its intensity. She needs to hear this, sitting here in this mausoleum, clinging to things. This house is worth millions. Millions. And you're just sitting in it. It's wasteful. It's pathological. The argument spiraled from there, a tornado of her resentment and my stunned disbelief. My refusal wasn't just a no. To her, it was a declaration of war. She stood up, pacing in front of the large picture window, her silhouette a dark, agitated shape against the serene lake. You don't even know what's best for you anymore, she spat, her voice rising. You could fall. You could leave the stove on. You're a danger to yourself, rattling around in this huge, empty place. We're trying to help you, to give you security. Security? I stood up, my own anger finally rising to meet hers. You call stripping me of my home and my rights security? This is not about my safety. This is about your greed. I looked at David, who had shrunk into the cushions of the sofa, the picture of uselessness. David, say something. Tell your wife that she will not speak to me this way in my own home. He finally looked at me, his face a miserable portrait of conflict. Mom, she has a point. It's a big house. Maybe it's time to consider something smaller, more manageable. His words were a betrayal, far deeper than Ashley's open hostility. He had sided with her. He saw me not as his mother, but as an obstacle, an inconvenient, aging problem that stood between him and his inheritance. I am not a problem to be managed, I said, my voice shaking with a cold fury. This conversation is over. I want you both to leave. I turned to walk away, my intention to go to my bedroom, to shut the door and reclaim some sliver of my violated peace. But Ashley moved with surprising speed. She stepped in front of me, blocking my path to the hallway. We're not leaving, she said, her voice low and menacing. We're going to see this through. For your own good. For your own good, Mom, David mumbled from the sofa, the words a hollow echo. He couldn't even stand up. He couldn't even look at me as he parroted his wife's poison. That was the moment everything changed. The moment the battle of wills became a physical assault. Ashley grabbed my upper arm. Her grip was like a vice, her long nails digging into my skin through the sleeve of my cardigan. I was shocked by her strength, the raw, wiry power in her hand. She wasn't coaxing me, she was forcing me. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through my anger. This was wrong. This was a nightmare. "Let go of me," I said, trying to pull my arm away, but she held fast. She didn't steer me toward my bedroom. She didn't steer me toward the front door. She turned me, with a brutal efficiency, toward the heavy oak door that led to the basement. "What are you doing?" I cried out, a wave of confusion and pure terror washing over me. The basement was cold, musty, a place for storage and old ghosts. Robert had always meant to finish it, but he never had. "We're just going to give you some time to cool off," Ashley said, her voice a chillingly calm murmur right next to my ear. "Some time to think about your decision, to be more reasonable." We reached the top of the basement stairs. They were steep, narrow, and uncarpeted. I dug my heels in, resisting, my heart hammering against my ribs. "David!" I screamed his name, a desperate final appeal. He was on his feet now, but he just stood there, frozen, by the coffee table, a spectator to his mother's abduction. His face was pale, his eyes wide with a dawning, impotent horror. He did nothing, and then it happened. With a sudden, violent shove from Ashley, my balance was gone. One foot slipped off the top step. My body pitched forward into the dark, open maw of the staircase. I remember a sensation of weightlessness, a brief, sickening lurch of the world, tilting on its axis. My hand scrabbled for a railing that wasn't there. I tumbled, not gracefully, but in a chaotic, brutal cascade down the steep wooden stairs. My body was a collection of impacts. My shoulder slammed against the rough plaster wall. My head glanced off a wooden tread with a sickening thud. I landed in a crumpled heap on the cold, unforgiving concrete floor at the bottom. A sound, a guttural cry of agony, was torn from my lungs. It was a sound I didn't recognize as my own. A sharp, incandescent bolt of pain shot through my left hip. It wasn't a dull ache. It was a blinding, screaming fire that eclipsed everything else. For a moment, I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. There was only the white-hot noise of the pain. Through the haze, before I could even begin to process what had happened, I heard a sound from above. The heavy oak door, which I had left ajar, slammed shut. The sound was a deafening boom that echoed in the cavernous dark space around me, shaking the very dust from the air. It plunged the basement into near-total blackness, the only light a faint, mocking sliver under the door. Then came the final, unmistakable sound. A sound that sealed my fate more completely than any legal document ever could. The metallic, grinding scrape of the deadbolt sliding into its housing. A click. Loud. Final. Absolute. The sound of my world ending. The sound of my new life beginning. I lay on the cold concrete, my hip shattered, the darkness pressing in on me like a physical weight. I was a prisoner in my own home on my 78th birthday, and the people who had put me here were my own flesh and blood. The silence that followed was the most terrifying sound of all. The first sensation was not the splintering pain in my hip, but the sudden, shocking impact of the final step. The hard concrete floor of the basement met my body with a blunt, unforgiving thud. For a moment, there was only the ringing in my ears and the taste of dust and copper in my mouth. Then came the pain, a white-hot bloom that started in my hip and radiated through my entire left side. Above me, the basement door, my door, slammed shut. The sound was deafeningly final. I heard the deadbolt, heavy and metallic, slide into place. A sound I had heard 1,000 times from the other side, a sound of security, of home. Now, it was the sound of a cage being locked. The first few days, or what I assumed were days, bled into one another in a haze of agony and darkness. The basement wasn't completely black. A single grime-covered window high on the wall let in a sliver of weak gray light that did little more than illuminate the dust motes dancing in the stale air. It was a vast space, a catacomb of my own life. Furniture I no longer had room for stood in silent, shrouded gatherings, their white sheets making them look like a congress of ghosts. In one corner, there were boxes of old toys, Leo's forgotten childhood. In another, my late husband's workbench, his tools laid out as if he'd just stepped away for a moment, a fine layer of rust creeping over the steel. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth, mildew, and something else, the smell of forgetting. Once a day, the bolt would grind open. I learned to listen for the scrape of Ashley's shoes on the linoleum floor of the kitchen above, the signal that my ration was coming. The door would open just a crack, never enough to see her face, and a plastic tray would be placed on the top step. Then the door would slam, the bolt would shoot home, and silence would descend again. On the tray, there was always a bowl of thin, lukewarm soup that tasted of salt and nothing else, a single piece of stale bread, hard enough to be a weapon, and a plastic bottle of water. It was sustenance as an insult. It was just enough to keep me alive, but never enough to let me forget I was starving. She never spoke a word, not one. The silence was part of the cruelty, a way of telling me I no longer existed, that I wasn't even worthy of a syllable. In the beginning, I screamed. I screamed until my throat was a raw, shredded mess, and my voice was nothing but a pathetic croak. I screamed for David, for my son, believing he couldn't possibly know the true extent of this, that he would come for me. The house absorbed the sound. I banged on the thick oak door until my fists were bruised and my knuckles bled, the impacts echoing uselessly in the cavernous space. Nothing. It was as if I had been completely erased. I could hear them above me, their footsteps a constant, torturous reminder of the life they were living in my place. The heavy tread of my son, the sharp, impatient click of Ashley's heels. I heard the television, the murmur of their conversations, the clatter of cutlery on my plates. They were eating my food, sleeping in my bed, living my life, while I was buried alive beneath their feet. The pain in my hip was a roaring fire, but it was a dull ache compared to the torment of being rendered invisible. I was a ghost in my own home, haunting the foundations while the living danced on my grave. The darkness and the silence began to work on me in a different way. When the screaming stopped, when my body was too weak to beat against the door, my mind, with nowhere else to go, turned inward. It started to dig. It burrowed down through the compressed soil of 60 years, past memories I had deliberately paved over, and found a root, a name. Clara. The darkness of the basement was a perfect mirror for the darkness I had carried in my soul for a lifetime. In the suffocating quiet, her face began to appear on the back of my eyelids. My younger sister, Clara of the wild dark hair and the laugh that sounded like wind chimes. She was the beautiful one, the gentle one, the one our father had utterly adored. He always said she had a poet's soul, too delicate for the world. When he died, he left this house, this beautiful house on the lake, to both of us, jointly. But I didn't want to share. I saw the house not as a home, but as a throne. I was the practical one, the ambitious one. I deserved it. So I began my campaign. It was quiet, insidious. A war fought with whispers and feigned concern. I started small. I'd hide her favorite brooch, then help her search for it for hours, sighing about her growing forgetfulness. "Oh, Clara, you'd lose your head if it wasn't attached," I'd say. And she would laugh, a little sadly, and agree. I started talking to her friends, our mutual friends, planting seeds. "I'm so worried about her," I'd confide over coffee. "She's been having these episodes, so emotional, she forgets things. It's like she's drifting away." I painted a picture of instability, of fragility, of someone who couldn't be trusted with her own affairs, let alone half of a valuable piece of real estate. The final act was a masterpiece of cold, calculated betrayal. I used my charm, a tool I had sharpened my entire life, on Dr. Albright, a family friend and our physician. He was an older man, susceptible to a pretty young woman's tears. I invited him for dinner. I told him stories, weaving a tapestry of Clara's supposed decline. I told him she was a danger to herself. I cried. And I begged him to help me, to help her. "She just needs rest, doctor," I pleaded, my voice breaking artfully. "A place where she can be safe. It's for her own good. She's just not capable of managing her inheritance, of managing her life." He believed me. Of course he believed me. A week later, 2 men in white coats came to the house. I can still see the look of utter confusion and betrayal on Clara's face as they led her away. She didn't fight. She was too gentle to fight. She just looked at me, her eyes asking a question I refused to answer. She was committed to a private sanatorium, a pretty prison for inconvenient women. With her declared mentally unfit, I became the sole owner of the house. I got what I wanted. Down here, in the cold and the dark, the guilt was no longer a distant echo. It was a physical presence, a monstrous thing I had starved for decades, and it was now feasting on my soul. The damp chill of the basement felt like the chill of my own heart. 60 years ago, I was trapped in a prison of my own making, a perfect, symmetrical hell. One afternoon, I dragged myself close to the door, pressing my ear against the cold wood, hoping to steal some warmth, some sound, some proof that the world still existed. That's when I heard her voice, sharp and clear from the kitchen directly above. It was Ashley, on her phone, and she was laughing, a light, carefree sound that sent a shard of ice through my chest. "I know, Mom. It's wild, isn't it?" she said. "But she's finally settled. Yeah, she's in her rest home now. Honestly, it's for the best. She was getting to be a real danger to herself, you know, just completely out of it." My breath caught in my throat. Rest home. Danger to herself. The words were familiar, chillingly so. But it was the next phrase that felt like a physical blow, like Ashley had reached through the floor and slapped me. "It's for her own good," she said, her voice dripping with a satisfaction that made my skin crawl. For her own good. The exact words. The very same justification I had polished and presented to Dr. Albright, to our friends, to myself. The lie I had used to steal my sister's life. The air was knocked from my lungs. The past wasn't just echoing, it was being reenacted, with me in the starring role of the victim. My head spun. Was this some kind of cosmic joke? A punishment delivered with a precision that was too perfect to be a coincidence? Then she said something else. Something that made the blood in my veins turn to ice. "It's exactly like you always said happened to your best friend, Aunt Carol," Ashley continued, her voice lowering slightly, conspiratorially. "Remember what happened to her friend, Clara. Poetic justice, isn't it?" The world tilted and fell away. Aunt Carol. Her mother. Her mother's best friend was Clara. My Clara. My sister. It wasn't about greed, not just about greed. This was a vendetta. This was a meticulously planned, generational revenge plot. Ashley had sought out my son. She had married into my family, wormed her way into my life, smiled at my dinner table, all while nursing a 60-year-old grudge on behalf of her mother. She wasn't just taking my house, she was taking my life, piece by piece, in a macabre reenactment of my own original sin. The woman upstairs wasn't just my daughter-in-law. She was the ghost of my past, returned to collect a debt I had long forgotten I owed. And my son, my David, he was her willing accomplice. The realization hit me with the force of a physical collapse. I wasn't just a prisoner. I was the centerpiece of a diabolical work of art. Despair became a tangible thing, a heavy, suffocating shroud that settled over me. What hope was there? They had thought of everything. My betrayal of Clara was a secret I had buried so deep I had almost convinced myself it never happened. Now, it was the very weapon being used to destroy me. I was trapped, not just in a basement, but in the gears of a terrible, grinding justice. I curled into a ball on the cold floor, the pain in my hip a distant drumbeat against the roaring in my head. It was over. Then I heard it. A new sound. Footsteps on the stairs leading down from the main floor to the kitchen. Heavier than Ashley's, but lighter, quicker than David's. A young person's tread. "Mom? Dad?" a voice called out. "Leo, my grandson." A boy I barely knew. He was 19, a creature of the digital age, more comfortable with his online friends on Twitch and the glowing world inside his computer than with his own family. When he did visit, he was polite, but distant, his face perpetually illuminated by the screen of his phone. "Where's that old Atari console?" he asked. His voice was muffled, coming from the top of the basement stairs. I thought it was in the basement. A buddy of mine on Discord will pay a fortune for a vintage 2600 in good condition. Ashley's voice cut through the air, sharp and cold as glass. Grandma took it with her to the facility in Arizona, Leo. She got all sentimental, said she wanted it for the common room. A lie. So smooth, so practiced. And don't even think about going down there. We had a plumber in last week. The whole place is full of black mold. Seriously dangerous. I heard Leo sigh. Seriously? The Atari? Okay, whatever. His footsteps started to move away. He was leaving. My one chance, my only link to the outside world, was walking away. A surge of something hot and powerful, something other than despair, shot through me. It was adrenaline. It was rage. It was the primal, desperate instinct of a cornered animal. My eyes darted around the dim space, landing on my husband's workbench. Lying there among the rust was a short, heavy length of iron pipe. I scrambled, ignoring the screaming protest from my hip. My fingers, stiff and clumsy with cold, closed around the pipe. It was heavy, solid. As I heard Leo's footsteps reach the kitchen floor, I crawled toward the wall where I knew the main water line ran. I raised the pipe, my arm trembling with the effort, and with every ounce of strength I had left, I swung it. Clang! The sound was shockingly loud, a deep, metallic concussion that vibrated through the floor and echoed through the house. It was a raw, primitive sound, a sound that did not belong. Silence. Then I heard Leo's voice, closer now. Whoa! What was that? It's just the pipes, son. David's voice boomed, too quickly, too loudly. This old house, always settling. But I had seen the flicker of doubt in Leo's tone, heard the pause before his father answered. He heard it. It wasn't just a noise. It was a signal. It was a dot, a dash, a single desperate plea sent out into the void. He was my digital ghost, my grandson who lived in a world of signals and streams, and I had just sent him my first message. A flicker of hope, fierce and defiant, ignited in the cold darkness of my chest. That single metallic clang changed everything. The knowledge that Ashley's cruelty was not random, but a meticulously crafted revenge, and the faint, flickering hope that Leo had heard something wrong. It was like a chemical reaction in my soul. The despair didn't vanish, but it crystallized. It hardened. My fear, which had been a suffocating fog, was replaced by a cold, clear, calculating rage. I was no longer a frail old woman whimpering in the dark. I was a player in a game I hadn't known existed, and I had just been dealt my first card. I stopped thinking like a victim and started thinking like the woman who had designed this prison in the first place. My husband, Robert, and I had renovated this house ourselves, from the foundation up, over 40 years ago. I knew every beam, every nail, every shortcut and secret. I knew its bones. My mind, now sharp and focused, began to walk through the blueprints I still held in my memory. The living room, the kitchen, the bedrooms, and the basement. We'd turned it from a damp cellar into a proper laundry and storage space. As I lay on the floor, my eyes tracing the path of the pipes along the ceiling, a memory surfaced, hazy at first, then snapping into sharp focus. Behind the towering stacks of old National Geographics that Robert could never bear to throw away, in the corner we used for laundry, there was a panel, a square of plywood, painted to match the wall. I'd always thought it was an access panel for the plumbing, but it wasn't. It was older. It was the sealed-off shaft of an old dumbwaiter. A relic from when the house was first built, running from the original basement kitchen straight up to the pantry on the main floor. We'd sealed it off during the renovation, deemed it unnecessary, a waste of space. My heart began to pound, a slow, steady drumbeat of purpose. I pushed myself up, my hips screaming in protest, but the fire of my anger was a more potent anesthetic than any drug. I limped to the corner, my hands shaking, not from weakness, but from anticipation. I began pulling at the magazines, their glossy covers depicting a world I was no longer part of. They were heavy, awkward, but I clawed them aside, driven by this singular, electrifying idea. There it was, a faint square outline in the drywall, exactly where I remembered it. The paint was cracked around the edges. My fingers, stiff and sore, dug into the seam. I pulled. Nothing. It was stuck fast, sealed by decades of paint and humidity. I looked around wildly. On Robert's workbench, I saw it. A paint scraper, its edge still sharp. I grabbed it, hobbled back, and began to work the blade into the crack, chipping away at the seal. It was slow, agonizing work. Flakes of old paint and plaster rained down on me. My muscles ached. But with every chip, I felt a surge of power. I was not breaking out of my prison. I was breaking into theirs. Finally, with a groan of warped wood, the panel came loose in my hands. I peered into the darkness behind it. A square black shaft, no more than 2 feet wide, shot straight up into the ceiling. It was too small for me to ever dream of climbing, a black throat leading upwards. But it was an open channel, a direct, unfiltered line from my tomb to their inner sanctum, the back of the pantry, a place of constant traffic. A place where they would feel safe to talk. I pressed my ear to the opening. The acoustics were perfect. The shaft acted like a natural amplifier. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the soft click of a cabinet door, and then voices. Their voices, clear as if they were standing right next to me. "Don't know, David, he's asking questions," Ashley was saying, her voice a low hiss. That noise was not the pipes. He's not an idiot. "He's a kid obsessed with video games," David replied, his voice weary. "He'll forget about it. We just need to hold on a little longer." George, the lawyer, called again today. "What did you tell him?" "Same thing. That you have power of attorney, that she's happy in Arizona, and that he's not to contact us again. We need to get this house listed on Zillow by the end of the month. The market is hot right now. We can't let this drag out." I leaned my head against the cool, musty wood of the shaft, a grim smile touching my lips for the first time in what felt like an eternity. Zillow, power of attorney. They were laying out their entire strategy for me. I could hear their lies, their plans, their anxieties. I could hear them craft the posts for Facebook, describing my peaceful retreat and how much I was enjoying the desert sun. They thought they had erased me, but they had inadvertently given me a front-row seat to their conspiracy. The architect's flaw had become my greatest weapon. They had locked me in the foundation of the house, forgetting that the foundation hears everything. I was no longer just the ghost in the machine. I was the operator, listening, waiting, and for the first time since that door slammed shut, I began to plan. The dumbwaiter shaft was my confessional, my oracle, my ear to the world, a dark, dusty throat running through the bones of the house. From its base, in the damp chill of the cellar, I could hear the echoes of the life they were living above me, the life they had stolen. I learned the rhythm of their days. The aggressive chop of Ashley's knife on the kitchen island in the morning, the hollow sound of David's briefcase hitting the hall table in the evening, the murmur of the television, a phantom soundtrack to a life I was no longer in. But it was the changes in that rhythm that became my focus. The small breaks in their smug routine. That's where I knew my hope lived, and it lived in the voice of my grandson, Leo. He was 19, all lanky limbs and a healthy teenage disrespect for authority that I had once found exhausting and now saw as my only salvation. The first tremor came on a Tuesday. I remember because the watery soup Ashley had left on the top step tasted vaguely of week-old fish. I was huddled by the shaft, my ear pressed to the cool, grimy wood of the dumbwaiter door, which I'd managed to pry open just a crack. "I don't get it." Leo's voice drifted down, tight with frustration. "Why can't I just FaceTime her? She loves FaceTime." "She always wants to see the dog." Ashley's reply was smooth as poison, a practiced, patient tone that set my teeth on edge. "Leo, honey, we've been over this. The reception at the new place in Arizona is terrible. It's a quiet community. They discourage a lot of tech. It's for her own good, to help her disconnect and relax." "It's weird," he insisted. "She'd call. She'd find a way to call. She'd send a postcard. Something." "She's settling in," David's voice chimed in, weaker, a hollow echo of his wife's. "Give her time, son. It's a big adjustment." I heard Leo sigh, a gust of youthful impatience. The conversation moved on, but it was a start, a seed of doubt. I had gambled my last reserves of faith on that boy's innate skepticism, on his memory of the grandmother who would never, ever go silent without a fight. The second tremor was stronger, a jolt that ran right through me. A week later, I heard Leo's voice again, sharp with accusation. "Okay, this is actually messed up," he said. I could picture him standing in the kitchen, phone in his hand, his brow furrowed. "Why is Graham's stuff on Facebook Marketplace? Her vintage gardening tools? The hand-painted ones from Germany? It says the seller is in Lake Oswego." A dead silence. The hum of the refrigerator seemed to roar up the shaft. "Ashley?" he pressed. Her voice, when it came, had a brittle edge. "Oh, that? Your grandmother asked me to sell a few things for her, to, simplify. She doesn't have the garden space in Arizona. It's all rock landscapes, very modern. She would never sell those." Leo's voice was flat. "Grandpa Robert gave them to her. She told me the story 100 times. She said she'd be buried with that trowel." "People change their minds when they get older, Leo," Ashley snapped. "Memories can become a burden. You wouldn't understand." "No," he said, and the word was cold, final. "I guess I wouldn't." From that day on, the tenor of their arguments changed. They became more frequent, more hushed. I would hear Leo's pointed questions, and then the low, urgent murmurs of David and Ashley trying to get their stories straight. They were so arrogant, so cocooned in their web of lies, that they never imagined the threat was living under their own roof. They never imagined their own son was sitting at the dinner table, his phone resting innocently beside his plate, the small red light of a recording app blinking silently. He was documenting every contradiction, every flimsy excuse, every slip of the tongue. He was building a case, a digital archive of their deceit. From the darkness of the basement, listening to the disembodied sounds of their lives, I had found my agent, my unwitting spy. The first thread of their ruin had been pulled, not by me, but by the love they had so carelessly underestimated. My hope was no longer a passive, flickering candle flame. It was a fuse, and Leo had just lit it. The digital whispers Leo was collecting were invaluable, but they were ethereal, words on a recording. I needed to give him something solid, something from me, a physical object that screamed my presence, that bridged the gap between his world of light and my world of shadow. It had to be undeniable. It had to be a message from the tomb. My prison was a museum of my forgotten life. Dusty canning jars, stacks of old magazines, a broken rocking horse from David's childhood that now looked like a skeletal creature in the gloom. My eyes scanned the shelves, searching for a vessel, and then I saw it. Tucked behind a stack of old paint cans was a single dusty bottle of my husband Robert's homemade blackberry wine. From the last batch he ever made, the year before he passed. Its label, a simple piece of paper he'd glued on himself, was yellowed and peeling at the edges. Robert's Reserve, Summer '08. My heart ached. It felt like a desecration to use it, but Robert would have understood. He would have smashed every bottle in the cellar himself to get me out. The tool was easier. The old coal furnace, long dormant, sat in the corner like a slumbering iron beast. I chipped a piece of charcoal from its belly. It was gritty and black in my palm. My hands, thin and trembling from cold and weakness, felt clumsy. I rested the bottle on a crate, using the faint light from the single bare bulb dangling from the ceiling. Leaning close, the smell of dust and damp earth filling my nostrils, I began to write on the peeling label. The charcoal was rough against the brittle paper. I had to press hard, my knuckles white with the effort. Every letter was a monumental act of will. I kept it simple, a telegram of desperation. Basement. The first word, the fundamental truth of my existence. Not a Z. The lie exposed. Ashley knows Clara. The bombshell. The motive. A name I hadn't spoken aloud in 60 years. A ghost whose presence had filled this house long before I was locked in its cellar. It was the biggest gamble. Would Leo even know who Clara was? I had to trust that the name, so alien in our family's carefully curated history, would be a red flag he couldn't ignore. Get George. The instruction. George Kelleher, Robert's best friend since they were kids, our lawyer for 40 years. He was retired now, in his 80s like me, but his mind was still a steel trap. If anyone could cut through Ashley's lies, it was George. I stared at the crude black letters. It felt like the most important thing I had ever written. A message in a bottle, not to be cast into the sea, but to be sent upwards, into the world I'd been banished from. Now came the waiting. The hardest part. I couldn't risk pushing it up the shaft at a random time. Ashley might be in the pantry. She would find it, and my one chance would be gone. I had to wait for Leo. I knew his habits. He was a night owl, a creature of late-night Twitch streams and study sessions fueled by junk food. Around midnight, I'd often hear the pantry door creak open, the rustle of a chip bag, the pop of a soda can. I sat on the cold concrete floor, the bottle clutched to my chest, my ear pressed to the dumbwaiter door. The house above me fell silent. The television went off. I heard their footsteps on the stairs, the closing of their bedroom door. And then, hours of silence. My hope began to fray. Maybe he wasn't hungry tonight. Maybe he was already asleep. The cellar seemed to grow colder, the darkness more absolute. Then, I heard it. A soft creak of floorboards in the kitchen. The quiet click of the pantry door. It was him. My heart hammered against my ribs. Now or never. I scrambled to my feet, my hips screaming in protest. I shoved the bottle into the dumbwaiter box. It was a tight fit. I put my hands underneath it and pushed. All my strength, all my desperation, all my hope went into that single, upward shove. My muscles burned. Dust and grime rained down on my face. The bottle scraped against the wooden sides of the shaft. For a terrifying second, I thought it was stuck. I gave it one last guttural heave. It moved. It clattered and scraped its way up the dark passage, a sound that seemed deafening in the silent house. It came to a halt with a muffled thud. It was there. Inside the pantry cabinet. I collapsed back onto the floor, panting, my body screaming. I had done it. My message was delivered. I wrapped my arms around my knees, shivering, and began to pray. I prayed to God, to Robert, to anyone who was listening. Please, Leo, find the bottle. The silence that followed was the most agonizing of my life. For 2 full days, the dumbwaiter shaft was a dead channel. I heard nothing but the usual taunting sounds of their domestic life. The blender whirring, David whistling off key as he made coffee, not a word about the bottle. My spirit began to wither. Had Ashley found it? Had she seen it, smirked, and simply thrown it in the trash, my desperate plea lost forever? Or worse, had Leo found it and dismissed it as a prank, a relic from a previous owner, just another piece of junk in an old house? The despair was a physical weight, pressing me down, making it hard to breathe. I had used my last reserves of strength on a foolish, desperate gamble, and I had lost. I was huddled in my corner, chewing on a piece of stale bread, when the silence was shattered. It wasn't a word. It was a sound from directly above me. A sharp clatter, the sound of glass hitting a wooden shelf, followed by a muffled, "What the?" Leo. He was in the pantry. I scrambled to the dumbwaiter, my heart a wild bird in my chest. I pressed my ear to the crack. I heard the rustle of the bottle being picked up. And then, a sharp, horrified gasp that was carried down the shaft like an electric shock. It was a sound of pure, dawning horror. He had found it. He had read it. I heard his footsteps, quick and panicked, moving out of the kitchen, a door closing. Silence again, but this time it was different. It wasn't an empty silence. It was a silence filled with action, with consequence. My spy had his orders. The next sound I heard, perhaps an hour later, was Ashley's voice, dripping with saccharine sweetness. It was her telephone voice. She was in the kitchen, pacing. "George, what a surprise to hear from you," she said. A wave of nausea and triumph washed over me. Leo had done it. He'd called George. There was a long pause. I imagined George's calm, steady voice on the other end, asking his questions. Ashley's tone sharpened. "My mother-in-law, George, she's fine. She's in Arizona. I told you that. Leo must be confused. He gets these ideas." He's very emotional about his grandmother. Another pause. George must have been persistent. A wellness check? Ashley laughed, a sound like splintering ice. That is absolutely unnecessary and, frankly, insulting. I am her primary caregiver. In fact, I have her durable power of attorney right here, signed and notarized last month. It gives me complete control over her affairs and medical decisions. She knew her mind was beginning to slip, and she wanted me to protect her. My blood ran cold. A forgery. Of course. She was smart. I had to give her that. She had anticipated every angle. Frankly, George, Mia has been suffering from dementia-fueled paranoia for some time. Ashley's voice was now cold, clinical, a weapon. She has episodes where she believes she's being held captive. It's a textbook symptom. Her doctor can confirm her diagnosis. You are a retired man, and I appreciate your concern, but this is a private family matter. If you or your young informant attempt to contact us or harass us again, I will have no choice but to file for a restraining order. Am I making myself clear? She was using the law as her shield. She was painting me as a crazy old woman, the exact same script I had used against Clara 60 years ago. The irony was a bitter acid in my throat. She was twisting my desperation into a symptom of the very illness she'd invented to imprison me. For a moment, my hope faltered. She was too good at this. She had built a fortress of lies, and I had only managed to hand my grandson a single crude stone to throw against its walls. George was a bulldog. I knew that about him. Once he got his teeth into something, he didn't let go. Robert used to say that trying to talk George out of a legal opinion was like trying to baptize a cat. It was messy, and you'd only end up getting scratched. Ashley may have won the phone call, but I knew she hadn't won the war. She had underestimated her opponent. She saw an old, retired man. I knew he was a sleeping giant she had just prodded with a very sharp stick. The house grew tense. The air upstairs, which I could only sense through the sounds that drifted down, was thick with suspicion. David and Ashley argued in low, frantic whispers I couldn't quite decipher. They knew something was wrong. They knew their perfect crime had sprung a leak. George didn't play Ashley's game. He didn't file a counterpetition. He didn't engage in a legal tit-for-tat over a forged document. Armed with Leo's secret recordings, a chronicle of lies and contradictions, and my desperate charcoal-scrawled note, he did something brilliant. He sidestepped the civil courts entirely. He went to the Lake Oswego Police Department and framed it not as a property dispute, but as a potential kidnapping and elder abuse case. He wasn't a lawyer fighting a power of attorney. He was a concerned citizen demanding a wellness check on a vulnerable senior who had mysteriously vanished, whose grandson was providing disturbing evidence of foul play. I knew none of this. All I knew was the waiting. Then, on a Thursday afternoon, the routine was broken by a sound that made my heart stop. The doorbell. It wasn't a delivery. It wasn't a friend. It was a firm, authoritative, two-tone chime that echoed through the entire house. I heard the shuffle of David's feet in the entryway. I heard Ashley's hissed whisper from the kitchen. Get rid of them, whoever it is. I crawled across the cold concrete, my hips screaming, and pressed my ear to the bottom of the basement door. The wood was thick, but voices carried. David Miller? A deep, calm voice. A policeman. Yes? David's voice was thin, reedy. I'm Officer Brennan. This is Officer Schmidt. We're here with Mr. George Kelleher to perform a wellness check on your mother, Mia Miller. Silence. I could feel David's panic through the floorboards. My mother. She's not here. David stammered. She's in Arizona. She moved. We have reason to believe she may still be on the premises, sir. The officer's voice was polite but unyielding. And we have a warrant that allows us to enter and confirm her well-being. A warrant. George, you magnificent old bastard. I heard Ashley's sharp intake of breath, her footsteps, quick and angry, approaching the door. This is harassment. I told him. I have power of attorney. You can't just... Ma'am, the officer cut her off, his voice hardening. We have a warrant signed by a judge. We can do this the easy way, or we can do this the hard way. But we are coming in. The world seemed to hold its breath. I could hear David's ragged breathing. He was the weak link. He always was. He didn't have Ashley's core of pure, cold malice. He just had greed and weakness. "David, don't you dare!" Ashley hissed, her voice a venomous whisper. But it was too late. The authority in the officer's voice had shattered his nerve. I heard a jangle of keys, a metallic scrape against the lock of the basement door, a sound I had dreamed of, a sound that meant freedom, or the final nail in my coffin. A click. The tumblers rolled over. The bolt slid back. The door swung inward, and the sudden torrent of light from the hallway was a physical blow. It was blinding, a searing white pain after weeks of near-total darkness. I threw a hand up to shield my eyes, blinking, my pupils contracting like dying stars. As my vision swam back into focus, the scene at the top of the stairs resolved itself into a tableau of judgment. 2 uniformed police officers, their faces grim and professional. George, standing behind them, his expression a mixture of grim satisfaction and profound sadness. Leo, his face streaked with tears, his eyes finding mine with a look of such overwhelming relief that it nearly broke me. And in front of them, David, his face ashen, a mask of pure, horrified guilt. Beside him stood Ashley. Her carefully constructed facade of the concerned, capable daughter-in-law had been incinerated. All that was left was a rictus of pure, cornered fury. Her eyes, wild and hateful, locked onto me, a crumpled figure on the dusty concrete floor, blinking in the sudden, merciless light. Her composure didn't just crack, it exploded. "She's not the victim here," she shrieked, her voice echoing in the sudden silence. She pointed a trembling finger at me. "She's a monster. You want to know what this is about? Ask her. Ask her what she did to get this house in the first place." David's head whipped around to stare at her, his eyes wide with confusion. The officers exchanged a look. "Ask her about her sister, Clara." Ashley's voice rose to a hysterical pitch. "The one no one ever talks about. She had her locked away, called her crazy and stole her half of the inheritance. This house, my mother was Clara's best friend. She watched her die in that place, broken-hearted. This isn't about money, it's about justice. She deserved this. She deserved to feel what it was like to be locked away and forgotten." In her panic, in her rage, she laid it all bare. Her entire, twisted motive, confessed in a torrent of self-righteous fury for the police, for her husband, for the world to hear. She had handed them her confession, signed and sealed with her own hatred. David just stared, his mouth hanging open. He looked from his snarling, screaming wife to me, a frail old woman in a filthy dress on a dusty floor. And in that moment, I saw the truth finally land on him. Not the truth about me and Clara, but the truth about the woman he married, about the crime he had committed, about the inheritance he had sacrificed his own mother for. I saw the entire rotten structure of his life collapse in his eyes. It was over. The lock was broken. The whispers were over. The screaming had begun. The police cars pulled away, their flashing lights shrinking into the gray Oregon drizzle until they were just silent, blinking stars that vanished from view. The house fell into a profound quiet. It wasn't the peaceful silence I had once cherished. It was a hollow, ringing emptiness, the kind that follows a sonic boom. The air still vibrated with the echoes of shouts, of accusations, of the metallic click of handcuffs. George, my late husband's lawyer and friend, stood in the foyer, his overcoat still damp, his face a mask of tired concern. Leo was beside me, his hand a warm, steady pressure on my arm, the only anchor in the disorienting calm. He didn't speak. He just stood there, a silent sentinel, his presence a testament to a loyalty I thought had vanished from the world. The house, my gilded cage, and my tomb felt vast and alien. Every object, the grandfather clock in the hall, the landscape paintings on the wall, the worn Persian rug under my feet, seemed to be holding its breath. They were witnesses. And now, they were waiting for the verdict, not from a court of law, but from me. My revenge was never going to be found in a witness stand. It wasn't about seeing David and Ashley in orange jumpsuits, their faces plastered across the local news feed on TikTok. That was their story, their consequence. Mine was older, deeper, a root that had twisted its way through 60 years of my soul. The justice I sought was for a ghost only I could see. A few days later, I sat in a sterile, climate-controlled office that smelled of weak coffee and industrial carpet cleaner. The district attorney, A woman named Ms. Chen was sharp, professional, her eyes holding a mixture of practice, sympathy, and legal analysis. George sat beside me, a bastion of quiet support, his leather briefcase resting by his chair like a sleeping dog. He had already briefed her on the basics: the imprisonment, the neglect, the coercion. Miss Dase Chen slid a file across the polished table. "Mrs. Sterling," she began, her voice even, "we have more than enough to proceed with multiple felony charges: elder abuse, kidnapping, unlawful imprisonment. Your testimony will be crucial. We just need to take your official statement detailing the events of the past few weeks." I looked at the file, at the neat, typed label with my name on it. I felt a strange detachment, as if she were talking about someone else, some poor, helpless old woman I might read about online. I pushed the file gently back toward her. "Thank you, Ms. Chen," I said, my voice clearer and stronger than I had expected. "But that's not what I'm here to talk about." A flicker of confusion crossed her face. George shifted slightly, but he remained silent. He knew what was coming. We had discussed it the night before, his initial protests softening into a grudging, weary understanding. "I am here," I continued, folding my hands on the table, my gaze unwavering, "to give a full, voluntary confession to a crime I committed 60 years ago." The air in the room changed. The professional sympathy in Ms. Dun Chen's eyes vanished, replaced by a guarded, intense curiosity. She leaned forward. "A confession? To what?" And so I began. The words, locked away for 6 decades, came out not in a flood of guilt, but in a cold, clear, orderly procession. It was as if I were reading an inventory of a ruined life. "It concerns my sister, Clara," I said. "This house, the one on the lake, it was meant to be ours. Both of us. Our parents left it to us jointly in their will. I was 21 and she was 19. I described Clara, not with the flowery language of a eulogy, but with the stark details of a police report. Her creativity, her spirit, her trusting nature. And then I described my own ambition, a thing so sharp and rapacious, it felt like a separate entity living inside my skin. I wanted the house, all of it. I didn't want to share its light, its prestige, its future. I wanted to own it, to be its sole mistress. Clara was a free spirit, I said, the words tasting like ash. In today's world, she might have had an Instagram account with 1 million followers, a channel on Twitch where she painted and people just watched, mesmerized. She was vibrant. But 60 years ago, that vibrancy was easy to mislabel. I started the whispers myself, quietly at first. A word to a family friend here, a concerned comment to an uncle there. "Clara seems so emotional lately. I'm worried she's not sleeping. She talks about these wild, impossible dreams as if they're real." I detailed the campaign, the insidious, patient architecture of lies. I explained how I collected her eccentricities, her love for walking barefoot in the rain, her habit of talking to the birds by the lake, her passionate, sometimes naive, political opinions, and reframed them as evidence of instability. I leveraged the patriarchal assumptions of the era, the ease with which a woman's passion could be dismissed as hysteria. The key, I told Ms. Chen, my voice as steady as a surgeon's hand, was Dr. Alistair Finch. He was an old family friend, respected, and frankly, a man who believed a woman's place was in the home, not in charge of a significant estate. I went to him in tears. I performed the role of the devoted, terrified older sister. I told him I found Clara weeping in the garden, convinced the trees were telling her secrets. I told him she was forgetting to eat, that she was planning to sell her half of the house to a commune she'd met. All lies, every single word. I could see Mrs. Chen taking notes, her pen scratching against the legal pad, the only sound in the room besides my voice. I didn't look at George. I couldn't. I kept my eyes on the blank wall behind the DA, picturing it as a cinema screen, projecting the scenes from my memory. He believed me, or he wanted to. It was simpler. I convinced him to make a house call. I prepped Clara, telling her Dr. Finch was coming to check on a persistent cough I claimed to have. I orchestrated the entire encounter. When he asked her about her future, she spoke excitedly about traveling, about art, about living a life unbound by convention. I had framed it so perfectly that he heard not youthful optimism, but manic delusion. He recommended a period of rest and observation at a private sanatorium. Belle Rive. I let the name hang in the air. It was a beautiful place, of course, not a snake pit. That was part of the cruelty. It looked like a resort. It made the lie easier to swallow for everyone else. I told them all the same thing. It's for her own good. It's what's best for her. The exact phrase Ashley used when she was lying to her friends about my trip to Arizona. The exact phrase she used when she told David we needed to lock the basement door. She learned the script from a story her mother must have told her, a story I wrote 60 years ago. I paused, took a sip of water. The plastic cup was cool against my lips. I visited Clara once at Belle Rive. She begged me to take her home. She said they were giving her medication that made her mind feel like fog. She wasn't crazy when she went in, but I have no doubt a place like that could have made her so. I told her to be patient. I told her I was managing everything. Then I went to see a lawyer. With Dr. Ian Finch's signed assessment, I petitioned the court to be granted sole conservatorship over my sister's affairs. The court declared her mentally incompetent. I became the legal administrator of her half of the estate. A year later, I sold her shares to myself for a fraction of their value, using her own money to do it, and legally, the house became mine. She never got out. She died in that place 8 years later. The official cause was pneumonia. I believe the real cause was a broken heart. The confession was complete. The room was silent. I had laid the bones of my crime out on that polished table, and they were stark and white and undeniable. Miss Chen finally looked up from her notes, her expression unreadable. Mrs. Sterling. The statute of limitations on these actions, financial fraud, wrongful commitment, it's almost certainly expired. There may be no crime we can prosecute. I know, I said. Prosecuting me is not the point. This isn't about sending me to prison. It's about the record. It's about the truth. I leaned forward, my voice dropping slightly, becoming more intense. My daughter-in-law, Ashley, believed she was on a righteous crusade. Her mother was Clara's best friend. Ashley grew up hearing the story of the brilliant, beautiful girl who was stolen away by her greedy sister. Her entire life, it seems, has been a long, slow-burning plot to enact justice for Clara. She wanted to take the house from me, the way I took it from her. She wanted to lock me away, to erase me, the way she believes I erased my sister. I gave a small, humorless smile. My confession doesn't exonerate her. Her actions were monstrous, but it does something far more devastating to her cause. It invalidates it. It reframes her grand quest for justice for what it truly was, a petty, cruel, and pathetic echo of a far greater crime. She didn't want justice for Clara. She wanted to become me. She wanted to hold the power I once held. She saw a monster, and instead of slaying it, she decided to mimic it. I sat back, feeling a profound sense of release. It was as if a heavy, iron cloak I had been wearing for 60 years had finally been unclasped and slid from my shoulders. The narrative was no longer hers. Ashley's story of revenge was now just a footnote in my story of atonement. I had taken it back. I was no longer the victim of her crime. I was the perpetrator of mine, and I was finally facing it. I signed the official statement, my signature firm and clear. As I walked out of the office and into the clean, cool air of the hallway where Leo was waiting, I felt lighter than I had in my entire adult life. The first step was done, but the final act was yet to come. My liberation couldn't end with a confession gathering dust in a file cabinet. It had to be a public act, a demolition. The house, the beautiful, silent catalyst for so much pain, could not be my home any longer. It was a monument to my sin and Ashley's obsession. Its foundation wasn't stone and concrete. It was ambition and grief. George put me in touch with a woman named Evelyn Reed, a top trust and estate lawyer in Portland. She had a sleek, modern office overlooking the Willamette River, a wall of glass that made you feel like you were floating above the city. She was sharp, efficient, and wore a minimalist pantsuit that probably cost more than my first car. She listened intently as I laid out my plan, her pen tapping a rhythmic, thoughtful beat on her notepad. "So, let me be clear," she said, her eyes narrowed in concentration. "You want to amend your will to completely disinherit your son, David." "Completely and irrevocably," I confirmed. "I want it structured so that he cannot contest it on any grounds." She nodded slowly. "It's your asset, your decision. It will be challenged, of course. He'll claim undue influence, or that you're not of sound mind, especially given the recent circumstances. Which is why my confession to the DA is so vital," I countered. "It proves I am of exceptionally sound mind, sound enough to remember, in perfect detail, a crime from 60 years ago. And Leo will testify that I am acting of my own free will. This is my decision." I thought of David. I allowed myself a moment to remember him as a boy, with scraped knees and a trusting smile, holding my hand as we walked by the lake. It was a necessary pain, a final acknowledgement of the boy who was lost, and the man who had replaced him. He had stood by and watched as his wife shoved me down a flight of stairs. He had turned the key in the lock. He had chosen the house, the inheritance, over his own mother. He had made his choice. Now I was making mine. "There's more," I said, and Evelyn leaned forward again. "I want to create a foundation." I laid out the second part of the plan. The name came to me in the dead of night, a whisper in the quiet of my temporary apartment. "It will be called the Clara Foundation," I said, the name feeling solid and real on my tongue. It was finally giving her something permanent, something with her name on it that wasn't a headstone. "The mission," I continued, "will be to provide legal and financial aid to victims of intra-family property theft and psychological abuse, for people manipulated out of their homes by their own blood, for people who are told they're crazy so someone else can steal their future." Evelyn's professional facade softened for a moment. She saw the whole picture now. "And the endowment for this foundation?" she asked, though I think she already knew the answer. "Its first and only endowment," I said, "will be my multi-million-dollar Lake Oswego home, and all of its contents. I am giving it all away." The press conference was my idea. It was the only way to make the act final, to cauterize the wound in public. We held it in a rented room at a downtown hotel. It was packed. The local news channels were there, KGW and Cohen, their cameras like big, black, unblinking eyes. There were reporters from the Oregonian, bloggers I didn't recognize, and young journalists live streaming on their phones for platforms I'd only ever heard of. The glare of the lights was hot, but I didn't feel nervous. I felt calm. Leo stood just to my left, a quiet pillar of support. He wore a dark suit, looking older than his 19 years, his presence a silent rebuke to his parents. I walked to the podium. I didn't read from a script. I had lived this script. "Good morning," I began, my voice carrying clearly through the microphone. "My name is Mia Sterling. Many of you are here because of a recent and painful family matter that has become public record. I am not here to discuss the charges against my son and daughter-in-law. The legal system will run its course. I am here to talk about a house." A quiet murmur went through the room. "It's a beautiful house, on a lake. It has been the center of my life for over 60 years. But houses are more than just wood and stone. They are containers for our stories. And the story of this house has been one of great pain. It was built on a foundation of love, but it became a prison. First for my beloved sister, Clara, and then much later for me. Its story cannot be allowed to end in bitterness, greed, and revenge. It must end in redemption." I paused, letting the words sink in. "That is why, effective today, I have placed the house and all of my assets into a charitable trust. I am announcing the formation of the Clara Foundation." I outlined its mission, my voice steady. "The foundation will be dedicated to fighting the kind of silent, insidious abuse that happens behind closed doors, often perpetrated by those we are supposed to trust the most. Then, the final blow. The one aimed not with anger, but with the cold, clean precision of consequence. The Clara Foundation's founding endowment will be the Lake Oswego home. I am giving it all away. Its value will now be used to protect others, not to enrich one family. It will become a house of atonement. I finished my statement and simply said, "Thank you." I didn't take questions. I let Leo guide me away from the podium, through the storm of flashing cameras and shouted inquiries. We walked out into the cool Portland air, and for the first time, I felt the breeze on my face not as a prisoner, but as a free woman. That evening, in the small, clean, anonymous apartment Leo had helped me find, we watched the news. And there it was. A reporter ambushed David as he was leaving his lawyer's office. He looked haggard, his face pale and drawn. The reporter shoved a microphone in his face. "Mr. Sterling, your mother just held a press conference. She's giving the house away, all of it, to a new charity. Do you have any comment?" I watched the screen, my heart beating a slow, steady rhythm. I saw the confusion on David's face, then the slow dawning wave of comprehension that washed over him. It was like watching a building collapse in slow motion. The denial, the shock, the final, crushing realization. The color drained from his face. His mouth opened slightly. The inheritance, the prize. The entire reason he had sacrificed his mother, his morality, his soul, was gone. It had vanished into thin air, transformed into a legacy for a woman he'd never met. He had nothing. He turned away from the camera, his shoulders slumped in utter defeat. He hadn't just lost a house, he had lost the entire purpose of his betrayal. I clicked off the TV. The silence in my small living room was warm and peaceful. I looked around at the simple furniture, the bare walls waiting to be filled with new memories. I had nothing. A few changes of clothes, a handful of books, a framed photo of Leo. And it felt like everything. The ghosts were gone. The weight was lifted. I walked over to the window and looked out at the city lights, a constellation of possibilities. I am unburdened. My story, the one written in silence and pain for 60 years, is finally over. But I know, with a certainty that chills me, that so many other stories like it are just beginning, unfolding behind closed doors in quiet neighborhoods just like yours. The weapons aren't always fists. Sometimes they're whispers, legal documents, and the slow, steady erosion of a person's reality. So I ask you, as you listen to this, to think. Look around you, at your own families, at the stories you hear from friends. Have you ever seen a flicker of this kind of darkness? Have you ever felt that cold whisper of control disguised as concern? Let me know in the comments below. You don't need to share names or traumatic details. Just a simple, "I've seen it." If you've ever felt that chill. Because the first step to bringing these things into the light is knowing you are not alone in seeing them.